As of this year, it's legal for anyone to hunt deer with a crossbow during any open deer season. But prior to this year, only hunters with certain disabilities could use a crossbow. And Jimmy Spataro was one of those hunters, and he's got quite a story. Jimmy, you got started as a hunter rather late in life, didn't you?
Yeah, Dan, I was a golfer for 49 years. And I have a disease from an accident, caused by an accident, and I had to give up golf. And I was watching TV, and I saw Jim Shockey, and I thought, you know, maybe I could try this sport. And I got a hold of a friend, Steve Pagel from Forge Bow Company, and I thought maybe I could try the bow hunting. And I had a little problem because I couldn't pull. I was having trouble pulling 33 pounds. And since I hunt in a smaller location and semi-metro in Waukesha County, he said, you can't, you know, you need a crossbow. And so I went to the DNR, I got the application, and I had to have a doctor and a physical therapist give me the ability to use a crossbow. I looked at crossbows. I picked the 10-point because it had a crank on it that I could very easily cock the bow. And I was a hunter. And fortunately, my neighbors were able to let me use, you know, an area of about 7 or 8 acres of very dense wooded. And that first year I did get a doe, and it was pretty exciting. And I've been a hunter since. I've watched a lot of TV. I've asked a lot of questions of people, and I got very, very lucky in 2010.
And that's this deer here, isn't it?
That's Mr. Big.
So tell us about that hunt.
Well, that hunt started kind of with a problem. My wife suffered a brain aneurysm right in the center of her brain about a month and 5 weeks before I got this deer. And from the fourth, you know, God looked after us, and we were able to come home a week later, and she was doing fine, but doctor instructed her that she had to rest at least twice a day. Well, after 5 weeks, I decided, you know, Linda, maybe I could go out and hunt. You know, it's only 10, 15 minutes, and I can be in a deer stand, and that's what I did. And this was the third day I was out there, and Linda sprayed me down, and you know, and wished me good luck. And she went to bed, and I went to the deer stand.
Okay.
And as I'm sitting in the deer stand, I used the grunt call and the thing, but I was really just out there to relax. And it was a very nice day. It was 55 degrees, and about 3:30 the weather changed, and it got cool, and the wind was southwest, which is a perfect wind for my deer stand. And I looked at my cell phone, and it said 4:03, and I was starting to get a lot of pain in my body from my fibromyalgia, my disease. And I said, maybe I should go in. And I went, no, this is the prime time. Well, at 4:04, about 30 yards from me, over a ridge, walks this beautiful deer. And I kind of stood up, and I kind of crouched, and I was holding the crossbow, crouched. And my disease got my knees, because I don't have the muscle strength anymore. My knees started to shake. And as they were shaking, he kind of the deer turned his head a different way, and I was able to stand up straight. And he kept walking straight at me. Never knew I was there, and I never ever, the only thing I'm really proud of is I never looked at the antlers. I was concentrated on where I was going to shoot him. And he got about 10 yards from me, and he stopped. He looked back the way he came, and all of a sudden he turned dead broadside, and I nailed him perfectly. I hit him. I got lung and heart. He kind of loped forward twice, and he loped back the way he came. When he got to that ridge, I heard him slide right straight down it, and I still hadn't looked at those antlers. All right? So of course, it took me a half a minute, and I called Linda, and I woke her, and I said, Linda, honey, I got a great big buck. I don't know how big it is. I don't know if it's a 2, a 10, a 12, a 14. I have no idea. It's the biggest deer I've ever seen. If you're okay, do you want to walk over and bring the camera? And she said, yeah, I'll be right there. I said, I'm going to call Jason. All right, so I called my friend Jason Harris, and Jason said to me, and I said, Jason, and basically the same thing, I got this big buck. And Jason said, Jimmy, you are too nervous. He said, you just sit down in that stand for 10 minutes when you close the phone and wait. And he said, and then can you see your arrow? And I said, yeah. And he said, then retrieve your arrow and get out of the woods. He said, because it takes a long time for a big deer to die. And I said, okay. So then I called Randy Wiesman and his son, AJ. There are some neighbors that live up at the end of the block, and they said they would come down, and well, I sat there for the 10 minutes, and I was nervous. I was shaken. I always laughed that everybody shook when they got a big buck. Mm-hmm. Nah, not anymore. I know what happens. After the 10 minutes, I got down. I went to look at the bolt, the arrow, and it was still red blood dripping on it, and there was a perfect circle completely around it. And when I got that, I picked it out, and then I could see Linda walking over, and I walked out of the woods, and I gave her a big kiss, and I said, oh, honey, I got the biggest deer I've ever seen in my life. And about a couple minutes later, Randy and his son got there, and Jason pulled up in a couple minutes, and we really didn't have to blood track the deer because we kind of knew where it was. I heard it crash, and I kind of knew. And they just said, oh my God. And they're hunters, okay? Never saw a deer this big. And I immediately was down, and Randy had brought a camera, and Linda had the camera, and I was down on my knees, all right, holding this heavy head up, and everybody was taking pictures, and this happened for about 20 minutes, and I couldn't, it was hard for me. I have muscle atrophy, and it's pretty tough. And so I really never got a good look at what, we got pictures with the crossbow on it, and the hat, and I wear my bomber's hat because it was cold. And the boys tried the 3 young men that were here tried to pull the deer out of the woods. And after it had been dressed, and they couldn't make it. So their dads picked up the deer and put it on the back of the car, and then they drove it to my garage, and then we hung it in the garage. And then the neighbors came over, and all the excitement that would go along with it, and everybody was excited. And I really, I knew it was a big deer, and we were counting points, and we didn't know if it was a 15-pointer or a 18-pointer, and everybody had a different opinion. And it was about 8:30 by then, and because we were out there for 3-4 hours, and it was really not until Linda and I came back in the house, and she took the chip out of the camera, and the first picture that came up showed me holding the deer straight on, looking like this, right from behind. And I said, oh my God, is that deer tall? I've got a magnificent trophy. So her and I ran out to the garage, and I took pictures of the antlers from every angle that you could think of because I didn't want to lose them. And it has been just 4 years of fun for us.
And then the Buck and Bear Club scored your buck first, right?
Yeah, that's right. Brian Tessman was the lead scorer on it, and they scored it 210 and 5/8 gross, and then it netted 179 and 1/8 net. That's because it's so palmated on one side. The one tine is quite a bit shorter than the other. Also, the deer is actually got a narrow
rack. It's
rack.
not wide.
The rack is very narrow.
And then you had it scored by the Safari Club.
I had it scored by John Hoffman, a master measurer who lives in West Bend, and he scored it 2:13 and an eighth. And that's the #1 record in the world. And then Deer and Deer Hunting I was in an article in their magazine last July, a year ago in July, and they put it up on their website, new world record for a northeastern typical buck. And of course, I've had lots of honors, and I got a nice recognition. I guess I'm going to be #1 in the record book for the Buck and Bear Club, which is a real honor to be in your own state and be the record holder. That's as important as anything, because we live in a great state.
Why the discrepancy between the two score systems?
The Safari Club does not deduct any of the differences in heights or anything, whereas the Pope and Young or Boone and Crockett Buck and Bear Club, if one is 10 inches and the other's 11, that's a 1-inch discrepancy. That's a deduction of 1 inch. Mm-hmm. So where the Boone and Crockett Club is that way, Safari Club they just measure the mass and that's it.
Now, speaking of SCI, you received a great honor recently.
January of 13, we were honored in Reno, Nevada as the #1 crossbow kill by a panel of 27 judges. We received a beautiful bronze statue, and we also, it was just kind of funny because he was #1, #2 was an African elephant, #3 was a kudu, and I couldn't believe it. Jim Shockey came and wanted to meet me, and it was very, very interesting because the people that had gotten this elephant kudu, they couldn't have been happier for me. And one of the judges came up to me at a luncheon for the Defense League and said, "Jimmy, you know, you were almost a unanimous choice." And I said, "What, over that elephant?" And he said, "Yep." And he said, "That's because you got yourself the biggest buck ever shot with a crossbow."